At 0617 hours on the 14th of November, 2011, in a dry canyon at the far northern edge of Helmand Province, a 29-year-old woman that no one at Forward Operating Base Sentinel had ever truly looked at was about to attempt a rifle shot that no marksman in the history of the United States military had ever made. 1,975 meters. One round, through a ventilation shaft the width of a dinner plate, into the chest of a man the Pentagon had hunted for 8 months without a single confirmed sighting. But the real war she was fighting, the one that mattered, the one that would decide whether she lived or died out there in the sand, had not started in that canyon. It had started 3 days earlier, in a dining facility, over a small piece of cloth stitched to the sleeve of her uniform. This is the story of what happens when arrogance meets silence, when rank meets truth, when a one-star general with a chest full of ribbons decides to humiliate a quiet staff sergeant in front of 150 witnesses and discovers too late that the woman he has chosen to break is the wrong woman entirely. Her name is Elena Vance. Remember it. Forward Operating Base Sentinel sat on a shelf of broken earth 17 miles south of the Helmand River, a skeleton of concrete blast walls and Conex boxes, baking under a sun that had no mercy in it. In the autumn of 2011, the base held roughly 400 soldiers, a rotating company of Marines, a handful of intelligence specialists, nobody asked questions about, in a dining facility that served 3 meals a day, whether you wanted them or not. The dining facility was a prefabricated steel hall with fluorescent lighting that never quite warmed the concrete floor. At 17:37 local time on the evening of the 11th of November, the place smelled of grilled chicken diesel exhaust from the generators outside and the particular sour funk that soldiers carry on them after a long patrol. The air hummed. Generators, voices, the scrape of boots, the clatter of aluminum trays against the steel rails of the serving line. Somewhere above, the distant drone of a surveillance aircraft traced a lazy circle against the darkening sky. She came in alone. She always did. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance moved through the chow line with an economy of motion that was almost invisible. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, 130 pounds, and her uniform hung on her in a way that suggested either recent weight loss or a woman who simply did not care how the Army cut its trousers. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight, flat bun at the base of her skull. Her eyes were gray, not pale gray, not stormy gray, the gray of a gun barrel that had been well cared for and fired many times. She took a portion of rice, a piece of grilled chicken, a bottle of water, nothing more. She did not speak to the server. She did not smile. She nodded once, a small, economical gesture, and walked to the corner of the hall where the tables met the back wall and an emergency exit door stood under a red sign. She sat with her back to the wall. It was not paranoia. It was training. Every soldier who had ever worked in the shadow of a close quarters fight sat with their back to the wall. You saw the room, you saw the door, you saw the threat before the threat saw you. It was not something you thought about. It was something that lived in your spine. She ate slowly, methodically. She chewed each bite 15 times. She set her fork down between bites. She did not look at her plate. Her eyes moved small, slow, unhurried across the hall, marking the positions of the exits, the cameras, the officers, the loud clusters of infantry who always laughed too hard at their own jokes when staff officers were listening. On the right sleeve of her combat uniform, just above the elbow, she wore a single subdued patch. It was circular, dark. The embroidered shape inside was a phoenix rising out of what might have been flames or might have been static, the stitching deliberately ambiguous. Beneath the bird, in small capital letters of faded gold thread, were 3 Latin words: Fides in tenebris, faith in darkness. It was the kind of patch that most soldiers seeing it from across a room would take for one of those tactical lifestyle brands that sold $5 morale patches on the internet. It had no unit number, no regimental crest, no identifying marks of any kind that a man familiar with the official heraldry of the United States Army would recognize. But the patch was not from the internet. The patch had been sewn onto her sleeve by a gray-haired seamstress in a building outside Fort Bragg that did not appear on any map. It had been issued to her by a 4-star general whose name was classified at a level above most Pentagon secretaries. And it was authorized under a standing memorandum signed in the office of the Secretary of Defense for wear by exactly 11 people currently drawing breath on the planet. She was one of them. She was halfway through her chicken when the shadow fell across her table. She did not look up immediately. She heard the boots first. 2 pairs, one heavier, one lighter. She smelled the cologne a half-second later, a sharp commercial sandalwood that did not belong on a forward operating base 17 miles from an active shooting war. Then she heard the voice. "Staff Sergeant, It was not a question. It was an announcement. A voice that had been trained in briefing rooms and parade grounds pitched to carry over the low murmur of a crowd to cut through the hum and silence it. The hall went quiet in a ripple. First the tables nearest them, then the serving line, then the far corners. Conversation died in stages the way it dies when a fight is about to start in a bar. Heads turned, forks stopped moving. She set her fork down. She chewed. She swallowed. She placed her hand flat against the edge of the tray to steady it, and she looked up. Brigadier General Marcus Holloway stood at the edge of her table. He was a large man, 6'3", 220 pounds. His hair was iron gray and cut to within a quarter-inch of regulation. His uniform was immaculate, the creases on his trousers sharp enough to cut paper. The left side of his chest carried more ribbons than a Christmas tree, and above them rode a combat infantryman badge, a ranger tab, and a master parachutist insignia. His face was weathered in the particular way that outdoor men weather a road map of sun and wind and decisions made under pressure. His eyes, pale blue, fixed not on her face but on her sleeve. Beside him stood Colonel Trent Reeves, his sector operations officer, a thin man with a narrow mustache and the tight, patient smile of a hall monitor who had grown up to run hallways much larger than his ambition deserved. Staff Sergeant Holloway said again, "I do not recognize that piece of flair you are wearing." Reeves chuckled, a small, dutiful chuckle. He kept his hands folded behind his back in the parade rest position. Lena looked at the general. She did not blink. "It is a unit insignia, sir." Her voice was quiet, level. There was no nervousness in it, and there was no defiance in it. It was the voice of a woman reading numbers off a page. Holloway's mouth twitched into something that was not quite a smile. He leaned forward, placing both of his large hands flat on her small table, and the metal legs groaned under his weight. "A unit insignia," he repeated. "Staff Sergeant, I am personally familiar with every authorized unit patch in this theater of operations. Every single one. I have reviewed the heraldry manuals. I have signed the deployment orders. I have approved the uniform modifications. That little bird on your sleeve is not on the list." He straightened a fraction. "It looks like something you bought on the internet." Somewhere at the far end of the hall, a young private laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the kind that slips out when a man is trying to figure out which side of the fight to stand on. Reeves picked up the thread. "Probably one of those tactical lifestyle brands, sir. The ones that sell the operator t-shirts. Latin mottos, very popular with the guys who play paintball on the weekends." He said it with a small smile toward the nearest table of infantrymen, inviting them to laugh. No one laughed. Lena set her water bottle down. She rested her hands on either side of her tray. She did not reach for her sleeve. She did not move her feet. Her gray eyes did not leave the general's face. "It was issued, sir." 4 words, flat as a level. Holloway's smile vanished. "Issued," he said. "By whom, Staff Sergeant?" "By the supply sergeant at the paintball park. Because I will tell you right now, young lady, that you are standing on my forward operating base, wearing my uniform, eating in my dining facility, and I do not know what unit you think you belong to, but I can promise you it is not one that authorizes that little embroidered pigeon." The word young lady hung in the air. A man closer to the door winced. Reeves, encouraged, pressed in. "Let me guess, Staff Sergeant, 1st Fictional Battalion, the Secret Squirrels, Task Force Unicorn." That time a few men did laugh. They were the wrong men. Staff officers, clerks with clean boots. The infantry, the ones who had walked the wire, sat silent. Lena's eyes moved, not to Reeves, not to Holloway. She looked for one brief half-second at the black dome of the security camera mounted above the emergency exit, then back. "The insignia is authorized for my parent unit general." "And what unit," Holloway said, "is that?" She did not answer. It was not a refusal. It was a statement. Holloway felt it and did not know how to name what he felt. He saw a small woman. He saw a quiet woman. He saw a woman in a uniform that hung too loose on her narrow frame, and he saw a face that carried no paint and no smile. And he decided what he had decided the moment he walked into the room. That she was weak. That she was timid. That some diversity initiative or quota or checked box had put her in a sniper-qualified slot she did not deserve, and that he, Brigadier General Marcus Holloway, commander of this sector, was the man who was going to set the record straight in front of God and 200 witnesses. He straightened fully. He crossed his arms over his chest. He raised his voice. "Staff Sergeant Vance." He had at some point gotten her name. Reeves had been doing his homework. "You are a guest on this base. Your detachment is attached to my command. That means you fall under my authority, and my authority says that every patch, tab, badge, and pin on your uniform meets the published standard of the United States Army. That bird does not meet the standard. You will remove it. You will remove it right now, he pointed, a thick finger trembling slightly with the volume of his own voice. Take it off, Staff Sergeant. Take it off, or I will have the military police walk you out of this facility in handcuffs, and you will spend the night in the stockade for disobedience to a lawful order from a general officer of the United States Army. Am I clear? The hall was silent, absolutely silent. Somewhere a fork hit the edge of a tray, and the sound rang like a small bell. 200 soldiers had stopped breathing in the same moment. They watched a one-star general lean across a table and crush a quiet staff sergeant under the full institutional weight of his rank. They waited for the collapse. They waited for the tears, the stammer, the hand reaching, shaking to her sleeve, the long muttered apology that small people give to big people when big people have decided to make them smaller. It did not come. Lena Vance picked up her water bottle. She unscrewed the cap with the same deliberate, unhurried motion she had used to set down her fork. She took a small sip. She screwed the cap back on. She set the bottle down exactly where it had been before. Then she looked at the general, not at his eyes, past them, through them. For the first time since he had walked up to her table, Brigadier General Marcus Holloway felt something cold move up the back of his neck. He did not know what it was. He would spend the next 72 hours not knowing what it was. But his body knew. His body, which had walked him into firefights in 3 countries, which had saved his life twice when his mind had been too slow to keep up, his body knew. It said in a language without words, "You have made a mistake." "Understood, sir," she said. Her voice carried quiet as it was to the back wall of the hall. She stood. She picked up her tray. She walked unhurried to the dish return. She scraped her plate clean. She set her tray on the rack. She stacked on her silverware. She dropped her empty water bottle in the recycling bin that the base command sergeant major had insisted on 3 months ago to demonstrate environmental stewardship. She walked past Brigadier General Marcus Holloway without looking at him. She walked past Colonel Trent Reeves without looking at him. She walked out of the dining facility and she did not look back. She left the general standing there, a thick finger still raised, his order still hanging in the air, unfulfilled. He stood in the silence for what felt to him like an hour. It was 7 seconds. He could feel every pair of eyes in the hall on his back. He could feel the story already writing itself into 200 minds. He had a choice. He could order the MPs. He could chase a quiet staff sergeant down the gravel path and drag her back in cuffs. And he could stand on the principle of general's authority, and he could look to every man and woman in that room exactly like what he was now beginning to suspect he was, a bully. Or he could let it go and look weak. He chose fury. He turned slowly, and his voice was a low grind of a thing that had not been ground before. "Colonel Reeves?" "Sir?" "Pull her service record." "Yes, sir." "I want to know who the hell she thinks she is." The gravel outside the dining facility crunched under her boots in a steady rhythm. 3 steps per second, 45-inch stride. The cool desert night was settling in fast the way it settles in high country, the heat of the day falling off the earth like a coat being shrugged to the floor. Above her, the stars were already beginning to prick through the fading wash of the sky. She did not look at the stars. She did not hurry. She walked. Past the motor pool, past the chapel conex, past the portable latrines where a Marine was swearing at a stuck door. She turned left at the TOC and right at the generator bank, and she walked along the back side of the base toward the small, windowless building that served as her detachment's workspace. Halfway there at the corner of the MWR tent, a man was sweeping. He was sweeping the gravel. It was a ridiculous job sweeping gravel, the kind of job that base commanders assigned to keep civilian contractors visible, and the man performing it was not a soldier. He was too old to be a soldier. He was 67 years old. His hair had been white since Reagan's first term. His shoulders were still wide the way lifelong infantrymen's shoulders stay wide, but they had begun to round forward in the way that all shoulders eventually round. He wore civilian khakis and a faded tan polo shirt with a small embroidered logo of a private security firm over the left breast. His name was Silas Kincaid. He had been in a prior life that he did not advertise a command sergeant major in the United States Marine Corps. He had been in an even earlier life a 19-year-old lance corporal who had pulled himself out of the rubble of the Beirut barracks at 5:22 in the morning on October 23, 1983, after the Mercedes truck and the 12,000 pounds of hexogen had made Americans of a certain age understand for the first time what the word suicide bomber meant. He had lost 23 friends in a single breath that morning. He had been digging with his bare hands for 73 hours before they had pulled him off the pile and carried him to the hospital ship. He did not talk about it. He did not have to. The eyes were enough. Silas Kincaid had for the past 10 months worked as a civilian liaison on forward operating Base Sentinel. He cleaned, he swept, he carried boxes. He was paid a small salary by a contracting firm, and he had a small room in the civilian billeting, and he was to anyone who did not know to look an old man on a base full of young ones. He knew to look. He had been watching the dining facility door for 15 minutes. When Lena Vance walked past him, sweeping his broom in the same patient arc he had been sweeping it in when she had gone into the chow hall, she did not slow down. She did not stop. She did not look at him. But her eyes flicked once to his, and her chin dipped, a quarter of an inch, no more. He dipped his in return. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. He kept sweeping. She kept walking. And if a man had been watching from 100 yards away, he would have seen nothing. Just an old janitor and a young sergeant passing each other in the long desert evening, the way 1,000 janitors and 1,000 sergeants pass each other on 1,000 bases every day. He would not have seen the debt. He would not have seen that this old man had in his wallet, folded behind his driver's license, a photograph of a young Marine corporal in a hospital bed with bandages wrapped around his head and an IV in his arm and a crooked, dazed, alive smile on his face. He would not have known that the young Marine was the old man's only son. He would not have known that 14 months earlier, in a valley called Kayaki, the young Marine's heart had stopped beating for 1 minute and 41 seconds, and that the reason it had started beating again was that the quiet staff sergeant now walking past the MWR tent had stayed on a windswept ridge for 19 straight hours, alone with a sniper rifle and a field radio directing a medevac helicopter through a corridor of enemy fire to reach him. He would not have known that the piece of shrapnel still lodged in that staff sergeant's right thigh had been put there by the same mortar round that had tried to kill the old man's boy. He would not have known because the old man did not say it, and the staff sergeant did not say it, and the United States Army had for its own reasons classified most of the paperwork. But the old man knew, and the staff sergeant knew. And when you have that kind of knowing between two people, you do not need to speak. A nod is a cathedral. The SCIF, the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, was a windowless steel shipping container that had been reinforced, shielded, and locked behind 3 separate layers of access control. The air inside smelled of ozone and cold electronics. A bank of servers hummed in the corner. The overhead lights had been dimmed to what the intelligence community called tactical red, a soft amber glow that preserved night vision and reduced eye strain over long watches. Sergeant First Class Cole Rutherford looked up when she came in. He was 38 years old. He had the face of a man who had been born in Montana and had never quite left it, even when he was 9,000 miles away. A narrow nose that had been broken twice, a jaw that had been broken once, eyes the color of tired coffee. His hair was beginning to gray at the temples. He had been Lena Vance's spotter for 5 years. He had worked with her in 4 countries. He had seen her do things with a rifle that he did not discuss with his wife because his wife did not need to know, and things with a radio that he did not discuss with anyone at all. He had heard about the dining facility. News on a forward operating base moves faster than any encrypted network the Army has ever fielded. "Heard you met the landlord," he said. His voice was quiet. She did not answer. She sat down at her station. She powered on her monitor. The screen threw a pale blue light across her face, and in that light, for the first time all day, the exhaustion was visible. Not in her posture, not in her expression, in the faint shadows under her eyes, in the small tension at the hinge of her jaw. She opened a secure directory. She opened a new incident report template. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with the unhurried precision of a concert pianist. She did not pause. She did not stop to think. Date: 11 November 2011. Time: 1737 Zulu. Location: dining facility, forward operating base Sentinel. Subject: interaction with Brigadier General Marcus Holloway, commanding officer, Sector West, and Colonel Trent Reeves, sector operations officer. She detailed the conversation verbatim. Every word, every pause. The exact wording of the order, the exact wording of her reply, the position of the security camera, the approximate number of witnesses. She did not characterize his tone. She did not describe his face. She did not write that he had raised his voice or that he had lost control. The facts arranged in their neat chronological rows would speak for themselves to anyone who knew how to read them. She did not mention her own feelings. There were none to mention. There was only data. The interaction was a data point. The general's emotional response was a variable. Her own response was a control. She finished the report in 12 minutes. She encrypted it. She uploaded it to a secure server that sat on a rack in a building in Virginia and was accessible only by the operational command of her parent unit, a command that did not for official purposes exist. She did not send it. She filed it. Chain of custody mattered. Evidence mattered. Rutherford watched her work in silence. When she was done, he handed her a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. She took it without looking up. She turned to the second monitor. On it, a waterfall of radio frequency signals cascaded down the screen, a chaotic spectrum of energy harvested from antennas on the ridgeline above the base. To the untrained eye, it was noise. The background hiss of a restless planet, commercial radio from Kandahar City, weather balloons from Bagram, the skip of a shortwave station broadcasting in Pashto, a Pakistani trucker somewhere on the ring road arguing with his brother about a bride price. To Lena Vance, it was a language. She had been listening to it for 3 weeks. She put on a pair of high-fidelity headphones. She closed her eyes, and for 2 minutes she did not move. She was hunting. 3 weeks earlier, while reviewing routine traffic from a drone flight along the southern ridges, she had noticed a signal that should not have been there. It had lasted exactly 0.17 seconds. It had been buried under the noise of a dust storm. It had been dismissed by the automated systems as a sensor artifact. It had not been a sensor artifact. It had been an encrypted burst transmission with a polymorphic, frequency-hopping signature that was supposed to be unbreakable. And it had carried buried in its hopping pattern a tiny repeating fingerprint, a digital stutter so faint that the automated systems could not see it. She had seen it. She had begun to map it. And what she had found patiently, quietly across 3 weeks of 16-hour shifts was a command and control network operated by a single man, a man the Pentagon had been hunting for 8 months, a bomb maker, a tactician, a high-value individual so careful, so paranoid, so technically skilled that he had never once been caught on camera and had never once given up his real name. He built the devices that had killed 31 American soldiers in the past year. The intelligence community had, for lack of a better name, given him a designation, the architect. He did not know that Staff Sergeant Elena Vance existed. He did not know that a small, quiet woman with gray eyes had spent 3 weeks listening to the edges of his network, tracing the digital shadows he cast, building a picture of him, one stuttering packet at a time. He did not know that she was close, very close, closer than anyone on the planet. At 2200 hours, Rutherford stood up and stretched. His back cracked. He looked at her. "You going to sleep tonight?" She did not take the headphones off. "Negative." He nodded. He had expected nothing else. He left. She worked for 3 more hours. The red tactical lights bled the color out of her face. At 0100, she made a note in a second encrypted file. The note was 1 line long. It said, "The architect has a flaw." She did not elaborate. 3 miles away in a wood-paneled office behind a door with his name on it, Brigadier General Marcus Holloway sat at his desk with a glass of bourbon in his hand and a folder open in front of him. The folder contained the service record of Staff Sergeant Elena Vance. It was thinner than he had expected. He flipped through it. Name, rank, date of enlistment, basic training at Fort Jackson, advanced individual training at Fort Huachuca, a period of initial assignment, and then, redacted, line after line, page after page, entire training schools blacked out, entire deployments blacked out, award citations reduced to a single line each, Distinguished Service Cross, details classified, Silver Star details classified, Bronze Star with Valor details classified. The unit assignment block was a single line. 75th Special Projects Group Detachment Obsidian. He did not recognize the unit. He had been a brigadier general for 4 years. He had served on 2 combatant command staffs. He had held a top-secret clearance with sensitive, compartmented information access for most of his career. He had never heard of it. He picked up his desk phone. He dialed a number at the Pentagon. He asked a polite, carefully worded question to a woman on the other end. There was a long pause. Then the woman on the other end said very quietly, "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to put that request in writing. And sir, I would advise you to think very carefully before you do." The line went dead. Holloway set the phone down. He stared at the folder. He stared at the bourbon. He stared at his own reflection, dim and haggard, in the dark window behind his desk. Outside, the wind rose. Somewhere in the base, a generator coughed. The morning came gray and cold. At 0700 hours on the morning of the 12th of November, Colonel Trent Reeves walked across the gravel path between the TOC and the SCIF with a tablet in his hand and a small smile on his face that he was not bothering to hide. He had rehearsed the phrasing. He had rehearsed the small smirk. He had chosen the words the way a man chooses a necktie before a business meeting. Reeves was not a bad man, not in the way that villains in movies are bad men. He was a mediocre man. He had risen to the rank of colonel on a combination of punctuality, obedience, and the genuine ability to make his superiors feel taller in rooms. He had never commanded a company in combat. He had never been shot at. He had never had to write a letter to a mother. But he understood in the bone-deep way that careerists understand that a man like Brigadier General Holloway remembered who had been useful to him in a moment of public humiliation. Reeves intended to be very useful. He reached the door of the SCIF. He badged in. The magnetic lock clicked. He pulled the door open. The red tactical lights were still on. The servers still hummed. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance was still in her chair. She had not moved in 9 hours. Rutherford was at the second station unshaven, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. He had come in 20 minutes earlier to relieve her. She had not been relieved. Rutherford saw Reeves come through the door and set his coffee down. Lena did not turn. Staff Sergeant Vance, Reeves said. She saved her file. She closed the window. She swiveled her chair, slow and deliberate, until she faced him. Colonel, Reeves lifted the tablet. General Holloway has reviewed your detachment's current tasking. He has concluded that passive signals intelligence overwatch, as currently conducted, represents an inefficient use of theater resources. Your mission profile is being revised. She did not react. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to archival signal review. We have a backlog of raw collection data from Sector Gamma. 3 months of it. Terabytes. Most of it flagged as low priority. Atmospheric noise. Commercial spillover. He paused for the rehearsed effect. Your assignment is to manually review the entire backlog, tag any anomalies, submit a complete report to my office by 0700 hours 15 November. That gives you 72 hours. Rutherford made a sound, a half-breath through the nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite a curse. Reeves glanced at him. Is there a problem, Sergeant First Class Rutherford? Rutherford opened his mouth. Lena spoke first. No problem, sir. The task will be completed. Reeves smiled wider. One more thing. While you are engaged in this review, your Overwatch authorization is suspended. The rifle stays in the armory. The electronic warfare gear stays in the vault. You are a data analyst for the next 72 hours, Staff Sergeant, not a shooter. Understood, sir. He turned on his heel. He walked out. Rutherford exploded. Quietly. The way men explode in classified spaces. He put his hands on his hips, looked at the ceiling, and said, 72 hours, 3 months of data. A team of 10 could not do that in a month. She was already opening the first data block. It is a task. The task will be completed. He looked at her. Lena. It was the first time he had used her first name in 6 weeks. She looked up. They are burying you, he said. They are trying to break you with boredom. They are sidelining you from anything operational. The moment something happens in this sector, they do not want you anywhere near the decision loop. I know, and you are just going to do it. I am going to complete the task. He stared at her for a long second. Then he sat down. He pulled his own headset on. He did not say another word, but he pulled up his own terminal and began without being asked to mirror the data blocks as she opened them. She noticed. She did not thank him. She did not need to. 5 years of spotter and shooter does not need to be thanked. They worked. Somewhere around 1400 hours that afternoon, Rutherford reached across the console and set a fresh cup of coffee at her elbow, and in the motion of setting it down, his fingers brushed her shoulder. It was nothing. It was a dozen years of working together. It was 1,000 cups of coffee on 1,000 watches. It was the wordless shorthand of soldiers who had lain in the same dirt and drunk from the same canteen. But the touch reached something, and for one of the very few times in her adult life, Staff Sergeant Elena Vance closed her eyes, and she remembered. Kajaki Valley. August 2010. The heat that summer in northern Helmand had been a living thing. The locals said it had been the hottest in 30 years. The ground gave back the day's temperature all night. You could press the palm of your hand to a rock at 3 in the morning and it would still burn you. She had been 28 years old. She had been on a ridge above a narrow, dry riverbed alone for 16 hours. Her mission was passive observation of a suspected weapons transit route. She had a sniper rifle. She had a field radio. She had 2 liters of water, a protein bar, and a set of high-end signals intelligence gear that had been built in a lab outside Fort Meade by men who did not sign their work. She had not been expected to fire. At 1741 local, a platoon of United States Marines, 41 men of 2nd Battalion 3rd Marines had moved into the lower valley along a route that had been cleared that morning by an explosive ordnance team. The route had not been cleared. The Taliban had been watching the clearance team. They had waited until the EOD men had passed. They had emplaced the pressure plates in the cleared footprints. They had retired into the high ground. They had waited for the main body. The main body had come. The first IED had taken the legs off a 22-year-old Lance Corporal from Ohio. The second had taken the life of his platoon sergeant. The third had not detonated. The fourth had put a piece of mortar shrapnel through the neck of a 19-year-old corporal from Flagstaff, Arizona, whose father in a cleaner life had been a command sergeant major in the Marine Corps and had survived the Beirut bombing in 1983. The corporal's name was Wyatt Kincaid. The platoon had gone to ground. They had been pinned in the low riverbed by 4 PKM machine guns positioned at the cardinal points of the canyon. A fifth position higher up carried a Soviet mortar. The enemy knew the range to every rock in that valley. The platoon's radios were being jammed by a simple but effective frequency-agile transmitter. Somewhere on the eastern ridge, they could not call for air. They could not call for medevac. They were going to die there, all 41 of them in the riverbed, with the wounded bleeding out on the stones and the water running red and the sun climbing high overhead. And then on an alternate encrypted frequency that the Taliban jammer did not know existed, a voice came up. A woman's voice. Calm, flat, level. Warhammer 3-6, this is Phoenix. I have eyes on. I have Overwatch. Stand by. The platoon commander had never heard the call sign. He thought it was a hallucination. He thought he was dying. He pressed his transmit key and said, Phoenix Warhammer 3-6, are you real? I am real 3-6. Stay low. I am going to make them lift their heads. For the next 19 hours, Staff Sergeant Elena Vance did the following things. She identified and engaged 4 enemy crew-served weapons positions. She did not miss. One shot, one gun. The first gun fell silent at 1803. The second at 1847. The third at 1929. The fourth at 2000. She identified the jammer. She did not shoot it. She did something more difficult. She mapped its hopping pattern in 40 minutes of listening, isolated its control frequency, and injected a counter signal that made the jammer report itself as inoperative to the Taliban operator running it. She then acquired on the Marines' tactical net, now clear, and began a continuous narration of the battlefield. Warhammer 3-6 enemy squad moving to your 9 o'clock high, range 150 meters. Warhammer 3-6 medevac bird is inbound 7 mics out. I will clear the eastern ridge before your bird crosses the saddle. 3-6, your corpsman needs another tourniquet. Package in the dead platoon sergeant's right cargo pocket. Repeat, right cargo pocket. She was never wrong. Not about the azimuth, not about the range, not about the pocket. At 0400, approximately 10 hours into the engagement, the mortar team on the high ridge found her position. They put a round in next to her. She did not move. The second round landed 20 meters closer. She still did not move. The third round landed 7 meters to her right, and a piece of fragmentation approximately the size of a pen cap entered her right thigh, traveled at a shallow angle through the muscle, and lodged against the inside of her femur, a quarter-inch from the femoral artery. She took a tourniquet off her kit. She tightened it above the wound. She noted the time. She continued to track the spotter. She put a round through the spotter's optic at 640 meters. The mortar stopped firing. At 0617, the medevac bird lifted out of the riverbed with 9 wounded Marines on board. Corporal Wyatt Kincaid was the second to last loaded. His heart had stopped in the back of the bird for 1 minute and 41 seconds, while a flight medic squeezed a bag valve mask over his face. It started again over the Helmand River. He lived. 12 Marines, in the language of the after-action report that the Marine Corps eventually wrote and then sealed at the top secret level, were returned to combat effective status as a direct result of the actions of the attached signals intelligence Overwatch asset. The asset was not named in the unclassified summary. The asset, bleeding from a hole in her thigh that the battalion surgeon at Camp Leatherneck would later describe as the kind of wound that should have put her in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, walked down off her ridge under her own power at 0900 hours on the morning of the 3rd of August, 2010. She walked 7 kilometers. She radioed in every 40 minutes. At one point, she sat down on a rock and drank the last of her water. At another point, she passed out for 4 minutes. She woke up and kept walking. The surgeons at Leatherneck looked at the fragment and its location and had a quiet conversation among themselves. Then they decided with her informed consent not to remove it. The risk was too high. She would live with it for the rest of her life. It would ache in cold weather. It would ache when she ran. It would ache sometimes for no reason at all. She had nodded once. Then she had asked for her laptop. And on a gray afternoon, 4 weeks after the engagement, an old man in a civilian coat had come to the hospital in Bethesda where she was recovering. He had walked into her room without knocking. He had stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long time. He had said very quietly, "Ma'am, I understand you are the woman who kept my son alive." She had not answered. She had not known what to say. He had crossed the room. He had taken her hand in both of his. His hands were enormous. His hands were shaking. He had said, "I owe you a debt. I do not know how to pay it. I am going to spend the rest of my life trying." She had looked at his eyes and said, "Sir, your son earned his own way out of that valley. I just listened to the radio." He had laughed. It had been a broken laugh. "Staff Sergeant, I have been a Marine for 39 years. You do not lie to me about what happens on a radio." He had walked to the door. He had stopped. He had said without turning, "If you ever need anything, Staff Sergeant, anything, you find me." And he had walked out. She had not seen him again for 14 months, not until she had walked past a man with a broom on a gravel path outside a dining facility in the autumn of 2011 and nodded. In the SCIF at 1402, Lena Vance opened her eyes. Her coffee was cooling. Rutherford had gone back to his terminal. The memory released her the way a held breath releases. Slow, controlled, without fanfare. Her thigh ached. It always ached. She returned to the data. At 1840 that evening, there was a soft double knock at the SCIF door. Rutherford looked up. She did not. The knock had been exactly the pattern she had expected. 2 taps, a pause, 2 taps. It was an old Marine Corps knock. "Get the door, Cole." Rutherford got up and badged it open. Silas Kincaid stood in the hallway. He was holding a large cardboard box in his hands. The box was labeled "paper towels" in black marker. "Evening, Sergeant," he said to Rutherford. "Got a supply drop for the staff sergeant." Rutherford looked at Lena. Lena said, "Let him in, Cole." Rutherford stepped back. Kincaid walked in. The door shut behind him. "I need a few minutes, Staff Sergeant, if you can spare them." She turned her chair. For the first time, she looked at him directly. In the red light, his face had the carved look of a piece of old oak. "I can spare them." He glanced at Rutherford. "This is a private conversation, Sergeant." Rutherford looked at her. Lena nodded once. Rutherford pulled his headset off. "I will be outside." He walked out. Kincaid waited. Lena waited. 15 seconds of silence. Then Kincaid said, "Staff Sergeant, I have been watching this base for 10 months. I have been watching your general for 8. I did not come out of retirement for my health. I came because a friend of mine in a certain office at the Pentagon asked me to keep an eye on things." He reached into the box. He did not pull out paper towels. He pulled out a slim, dark blue accordion folder, the kind that lawyers carry closed with an elastic band. He set it on the edge of her console. "This is for you." She looked at the folder. She did not touch it. "What is it?" "It is a pattern." She waited. Kincaid's voice did not rise. It did not fall. It was the voice of a man who had been reading bad news aloud for 40 years and had learned to do it in the tone a surgeon uses. First Lieutenant Margaret Ellsworth, Signal Corps, came in under Holloway at Fort Carson in 2007. Brilliant technical mind. Passed over for captain twice. Written counseling statements for attitude. Forced into a medical separation in 2009 on a fabricated psychiatric concern. She is working as a cashier at a grocery store in Tacoma. He spoke the name like a eulogy. Sergeant First Class Hollis Thatcher, military intelligence, 9 years of clean evaluations. Assigned to Holloway's staff in 2008. Filed an equal opportunity complaint after a meeting in which he told her she would, and I quote the complaint, "never be more than an ornament." Transferred 3 weeks later to a remote duty assignment in Alaska. Her career never recovered. She retired as an E7. She should have made E9. He did not look at the folder. He was reciting from memory. Staff Sergeant Beatrice Harlow. Communications. 2 deployments to Iraq. Outstanding Soldier of the Year for her brigade 2008. Reduced 1 grade in 2010 after Holloway personally endorsed a flag officer inquiry into a lost laptop. That was it, later turned out in the hand receipt of a male lieutenant in her section. The reduction was never reversed. The lieutenant was promoted. His voice did not change. Chief Warrant Officer 2 Odette Fairbanks. Cyber Operations. One of the first women on active duty to earn the Cyber Warfare Specialty Identifier. Served directly under Holloway in 2010. Her career management file contains 43 unfavorable information filings initiated by him over a period of 14 months. The counseling statements, when reviewed by the Inspector General, were found to be inconsistent with the documentary record. The IG investigation was closed after Holloway was transferred out of the command. No disciplinary action was taken. He stopped. He looked at her. That is 4 women in 5 years, Staff Sergeant. 4 women whose careers he broke. I can give you the names of 6 more who transferred away from him fast enough to avoid being next. Lena looked at the folder on her console. She did not touch it. Her jaw moved once. Kincaid saw it. He said very softly, I know what you are thinking. You are thinking you do not need my help. You are thinking you will handle this the way you handle everything, quietly, precisely, with documentation. He paused. But I owe you a debt. Her gray eyes lifted to his. 14 months ago, you kept my son alive. I promised you in a hospital room in Bethesda that I would spend the rest of my life trying to pay you back. I am 67 years old. I do not have many kinds of currency left. I have time and I have information. I am giving you both. She said nothing. I am not asking you to use this folder, Staff Sergeant. You are a better tactician than I am. You will know when and whether to use it. I am asking you only this. Do not let him be the one to break you. Do not let what he did to Ellsworth and Thatcher and Harlow and Fairbanks be the end of your story. Those women were alone. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Not since Kayaki. For a long moment, she did not answer. Then she said very quietly, I understand you, Command Sergeant Major. It was the first time either of them had spoken his old rank aloud. He nodded. He picked up the empty paper towel box and walked to the door. He stopped. He did not turn. Staff Sergeant, yes. My boy Wyatt is in North Carolina. He has a 5-year-old son he named after me. He is teaching the boy to fish. He is teaching him to throw a baseball. He is teaching him the old Marine Corps, him. He is doing all of these things, Staff Sergeant, because of you. I just thought you should know. He badged out. The door sealed. She sat for a long time without moving. Then she opened the folder. She read it for 11 minutes. She did not speak. She did not make a sound. When she was done, she closed the folder, placed it in a secure drawer, locked the drawer, and went back to her data. But something in her had shifted. A man with a broom had reminded her of something she already knew, but had perhaps forgotten to remember. She was not only fighting for herself, she never had been. At 2,300 hours, 30 hours into the 72-hour punishment, Lena Vance found it. She was reviewing a corrupted data block from a drone flight conducted 2 months earlier over a stretch of high desert 31 kilometers north of Sentinel. The block was flagged as damaged. The automated systems had written it off. Most analysts would have skipped it. The drone's sensors had apparently glitched for 6 seconds during a routine surveillance pass, producing nothing but noise. She pulled it up anyway. She slowed the playback. She stripped the noise layer. And in the 6 seconds of static, she heard it. A fragment of signal. 0.1 seconds long, buried deliberately inside a burst of decoy carrier waves designed to look like sensor failure. She froze the fragment. She isolated its hopping pattern. She ran it against the digital fingerprint she had been building for 3 weeks. They matched. Exactly. It was the architect, 2 months ago, 31 kilometers north, middle of the empty desert. She pulled up the drone's coordinates. She pulled up the satellite imagery from that day. The visible image showed nothing. An empty stretch of rocky ground, a low outcropping that looked from high altitude like a broken tooth. She pulled up the ground-penetrating radar logs from a different surveillance pass taken a week earlier. The logs were routine data, geological, low priority. She looked at them. 12 feet beneath the surface, directly beneath the outcropping, there was a void, a chamber, roughly 8 meters long by 5 wide, perfectly rectangular, man-made, concealed, with a single narrow entrance shaft angled in from the north, invisible from the air, and from the ground unless you knew exactly where to look. An underground bunker. For 8 months, the Pentagon had searched every village in a 100-kilometer radius, every mud compound, every cave, every suspect convoy. He had been under the dirt. She pulled up the topographical survey that had been attached to the drone logs. The outcropping had a name, a local name used by the nomadic shepherds who crossed the area twice a year. The name translated literally was the scorpion's tail. She stared at the screen for 30 seconds. Then she opened a new document. At 0600 on the morning of the 13th of November, with 16 hours left on Reeves's 72-hour clock, Lena Vance walked into the office of Captain Adeline Whitlock, her actual commanding officer, and placed a 3-page document on Whitlock's desk. Whitlock was 33 years old. She was from Charleston. She had a degree in astrophysics from the Naval Academy and had transferred into the Army after a medical issue disqualified her from flight. She was compact, precise, and carried herself with the quiet watchfulness of a person who had at some point in her life been underestimated and decided never to be underestimated again. Whitlock looked up from her coffee. "Staff Sergeant, ma'am, I need to brief you." Whitlock set her coffee down. She did not open the document yet. "Staff Sergeant, it is 0600. I have not had breakfast. Are we having a situation?" "Yes, ma'am." "Of what kind?" "The architect, ma'am. I have him." Whitlock stared at her for one full second. Then she reached for the document. She read for 4 minutes. Her coffee went cold on the desk. At the end of the 4 minutes, she closed the document. She laid her palm flat on the cover. "Staff Sergeant Vance?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you telling me that you have, in your possession in this building, the precise geolocation of a high-value target that J2 and the agency have been unable to find for 8 months?" "Yes, ma'am." "And that you developed this intelligence using data that Colonel Reeves assigned you as a punitive task?" "Yes, ma'am." Whitlock closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them. "Who else has seen this?" "No one, ma'am. Not even Rutherford." "Not in its current form." Whitlock nodded. She stood up. "Staff Sergeant, get your gear. Get Rutherford. Be in the operations center in 45 minutes. I am going to talk to the G3. Ma'am, before I walk into that operations center, General Holloway has to be told that the intelligence is mine." "I know. He is not going to want to accept it." "I know that too." "Ma'am, he is going to try to bury the source and take the intelligence." Whitlock's mouth tightened. "Staff Sergeant Vance, I have been an officer in this army for 11 years. I have watched men like Brigadier General Holloway try to bury women like you for every one of them. Not this time. Not on my desk. Not while I can breathe." There was a small silence. "Yes, ma'am." 50 minutes later, the door of the operations center banged open. At 0712 hours on the morning of the 13th of November, a panicked intercept came up over the intelligence net. A low-level enemy operative had been captured the night before. Under interrogation, he had broken. He had given up one piece of information. A major attack on the main supply route was imminent, scheduled within the next 24 hours, targeting a resupply convoy of 47 United States Marines assigned to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines Company E. The architect was personally overseeing the final preparations from a command post the operative referred to using an untranslated Pashto code phrase as the Scorpion's Nest. The operations center had at that moment been in controlled chaos. Drones were being redirected. Assets were being spun up. Every suspected compound within 50 kilometers was being retargeted. No one knew where the Scorpion's Nest was. They were searching the compounds. They were searching the villages. They were not searching the dirt. Brigadier General Marcus Holloway stood at the big screen at the front of the operations center. His arms crossed over his chest, his mouth a thin line, and he was listening to his J2 tell him that the most lethal bomb maker in the theater was about to kill 47 Marines in the next 24 hours. The main door opened. Captain Adeline Whitlock walked in. Behind her, carrying a slim dark folder and a tablet, walked Staff Sergeant Elena Vance. Behind Vance, carrying nothing but a hard coffee-colored stare, walked Sergeant First Class Cole Rutherford. The room became quiet in a ripple. Holloway turned. He saw Vance. For one single heartbeat, every muscle in his face went still. Then he looked down at the folder in her hand. He saw on its cover a small embossed phoenix rising out of stylized flames. Fides in tenebris, and something in his chest, something old and locked and kept carefully in a drawer of his heart for 5 years, turned over. He had seen those 3 words before. He had seen them in a different ink on a different page in a letter that had arrived at his home in Virginia in the winter of 2006, shortly after his son Thaddeus had been buried at Arlington. The letter had told him things about his son's death that the official report had not. The letter had been signed only with the image of a rising bird and 3 words of Latin. For 5 years he had carried the letter folded in his wallet. For 5 years he had wondered who had sent it. He looked now at the small woman standing beside Captain Whitlock, at the faded gold thread on her sleeve, at the gray eyes that had not, in 72 hours of his worst behavior, ever wavered. And he felt a small, cold hand close around the base of his spine. He said very slowly, "Staff Sergeant." "Sir." "You have 90 seconds. Brief." Vance opened the folder. She did not refer to it. She did not need to. "General, at 0137 hours on the 12th of November, I began review of archival signals data assigned by Colonel Reeves. At 2312 hours the same day, I identified a transient emission duration, 0.1 seconds, buried in a corrupted block flagged as sensor failure during a drone flight over Grid Square 44, Romeo Tango Sierra 297142, 31 kilometers north-northeast of this position. One breath. The emission signature matches a polymorphic frequency hopping fingerprint I have been tracking for 3 weeks. The emitter is the architect. Cross-referenced ground-penetrating radar data confirms a subterranean void 12 feet below the surface. Dimensions 8 meters by 5. Single concealed entrance angled from the north. The rock outcropping above the void is named in local pastoral dialect the tail of the scorpion. The code word used by the detained operative is "I assess with 98% confidence," a direct reference to this location. She closed the folder. She had used 51 seconds. The operations center did not breathe. Holloway walked to the main table. He looked at her folder. He did not touch it. He turned to his J2. Verify. 3 minutes passed. In those 3 minutes, no one in the room made a sound except the major typing. Sir, the grid is accurate. The radar logs confirm the void. The topographical survey confirms the nomenclature. Holloway closed his eyes for a second. Then he looked at his J3. Get me an option. The J3 was already at the map table. He spoke fast. Sir, we have 3 problems. 1, the bunker is 12 feet under solid rock. A standard airstrike will not penetrate without a precision GBUU-28, and the collateral estimate is unacceptable. 2, the architect's electronic countermeasures are sophisticated. Any active emissions from an approaching platform will be detected. 3, the canyon the outcropping sits in creates severe crosswind conditions. Probability of a first-round sniper hit less than 5%. Time to target. Sir, the convoy departs MSR Phoenix at 2000 local tomorrow. From the side of the table, a quiet voice spoke. Sir, the probability is not 5%. Every head in the room turned. Staff Sergeant, sir, my solution has a 97% probability of a first-round hit on a man-sized target through the designated aperture. What aperture? The ground-penetrating radar shows a ventilation shaft, exit diameter 18 inches. Thermal imaging from a pre-dawn pass 2 weeks ago, when the temperature differential is maximal, shows a faint plume. The shaft connects to the main chamber at a 22-degree angle. It passes directly over the architect's communications console, which he operates from a fixed seated position. The console is positioned there because it is the one point in the bunker where his long-range antenna array can reach him without cable relay. She paused. Sir, if he is in the bunker, he is at that console. If he is at that console, he is under the shaft. And if he is under the shaft, there is a 42-centimeter vertical corridor of open air between a round fired from above and the top of his skull. The J3 stared at her. 1,975 meters. Staff Sergeant. Yes, sir. I am not proposing a standard ballistic solution. Explain. Sir, Sergeant First Class Rutherford and I will infiltrate to an overwatch position on the northern ridge. The infiltration profile is entirely passive. The canyon below the target generates a cyclical vortex wind pattern. I have modeled it using 3 months of atmospheric data from the same archive Colonel Reeves assigned me. The vortex completes a full cycle every 72 seconds. At the apex of the cycle, there is a window of approximately 4 seconds in which crosswind velocity at the target drops to near zero. That window is my firing solution. And as countermeasures, 300 milliseconds before the shot, I will broadcast a polymorphic burst that mimics the handshake protocol of his own network. For 300 milliseconds, his system will register my transmission as a friendly node re-authenticating. The round will travel through that window. Holloway looked at her for a long time. Then he looked once at the phoenix on her sleeve, at the 3 words of faded gold thread beneath it. He said quietly, Captain Whitlock, get the staff sergeant and her spotter whatever they need. Log the mission as Phoenix Actual, classified, compartmented, reporting directly to my desk. Yes, sir. He looked at Vance. Staff Sergeant. Sir, if you miss, I will have both your stripes. She nodded once. She closed her folder. She walked out. The infiltration began at 1800 hours on the 13th of November. They moved in a Black Hawk to a landing zone 14 kilometers from the target, and from there they walked. For 6 hours they crawled and scrambled and walked through broken country in the left of the desert light and the first of the desert dark. Vance led. Rutherford followed. The shrapnel in Vance's right thigh ached with every step. She did not limp. She did not slow. The wind shifted at 2200. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds in the middle of a climb to feel it on her face. Rutherford, 10 meters back, saw her do it and understood. By 0400 on the 14th of November, they were in position. The ridge was a knife of rock, and it looked north across a wide canyon at the broken outcropping they had come to kill. Vance lay prone behind a natural hollow in the stone. Rutherford lay 2 feet to her right. Their ghillie suits were threaded with local vegetation. From 100 meters, they were invisible. From 10, they were rock. The rifle was a .338 Lapua Magnum, hand-built with a 28-inch barrel, a suppressor, and an optical suite that had been built in a classified lab in New Mexico. The round in the chamber was a 250-grain projectile, hand-loaded by a team in Virginia. Beside the rifle on a small folding panel sat the electronic warfare package. Rutherford began the calls. Wind is 7 miles per hour, gusting, 10 shifting from 2 o'clock. Mirage is running hard right to left. Temperature is 105. Barometric pressure is 29.92 and falling. Vance did not speak. She was breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold. 4 seconds out. Her heart rate was 60. She was watching live the Architect's network. It was active, it was handshaking, it was waiting for him. He was in the bunker. 20 minutes passed, the sun began to climb. At 0611, the Architect's long-range antenna began to power up. He is coming up. Rutherford moved his spotting scope. I have movement. Section of the outcropping is sliding, camouflage door. 2 guards exiting first. Armed, a K platform. Now a third figure. Tall, beard, light robe. That is him. Target acquired. Range 1974 meters. He is moving toward the antenna. He will stop at the console. He did. The Architect walked to a small, stone-covered position 20 feet from the bunker door. He sat down. He removed the cover. He began to configure the dish. He was for the next 90 seconds fixed. Vance placed her right eye behind the main scope. The world contracted. She dialed her elevation turret. 123 clicks up. She dialed her windage. 8 clicks left. The ballistic solution was complete. Distance, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, latitude, correless drift. All that was left was the wind. Vortex is building, wind is holding at 9 or from 2:30, peak in 10 seconds. She waited. 5 seconds. She placed her finger soft along the trigger. 3. She exhaled half her air. 2. The river of heat hesitated. Peak. And then, exactly as her model had said, it would, the river stopped flowing. The air over the canyon became placid. For 4 seconds, the world went still. Her left thumb pressed a small white button. 300 milliseconds of polymorphic code leapt across the canyon. Vance pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked. The sound of the shot was a short, sharp crack, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the desert. 2.6 seconds. Impact. Impact. Target down. He is down. Across a gap of 1,975 meters of bad air and worse wind, through a shaft smaller than a dinner plate, and a round had arrived at its appointed terminus. The Architect collapsed sideways off the console like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The 2 guards stared. They looked up. They looked around. They saw nothing. They grabbed the body. They dragged it back into the bunker. The camouflage door slid shut. In the operations center, a communications analyst shouted, "Sir, we just lost his command signal. It is flatlining." The room did not cheer. The room held its breath. Holloway did not move from the big screen. He was waiting for the second piece. He had not told Vance because there had been no time that the interrogators at Bagram had broken the detainee further in the hours after she had walked out. The man had coughed up, bit by bit, a piece of technical detail that had not appeared in any earlier intelligence product. The Architect did not trust his cell commanders. He had been betrayed twice. He had constructed as his final insurance a dead man switch, a low-power transmitter paired to a biometric sensor he wore on his chest, continuously broadcast a heartbeat confirmation to a remote receiver. If his heart stopped, the broadcast stopped. The receiver would automatically trigger the bomb that his cell had already emplaced along the main supply route. The bomb would kill the 47 Marines whether the Architect lived or died. His death did not save them. It killed them, and now his heart had stopped, and a clock had started. Holloway keyed his handset with a hand that shook. "Phoenix Actual. Phoenix Actual. This is Sentinel-6. You have a complication. Relay." On the ridge, Vance's radio crackled. Rutherford caught it. He listened. His face went white under the camo paint. He turned to Vance. "Dead man switch. Biometric. Signal drop triggers the MSR bomb. 60 seconds from his death to auto trigger. We are at 41 seconds. Vance was already moving. Not fast. Fast was for amateurs. "Map, give me relay position. Now." Rutherford was already on it. "There is a repeater antenna on a ridge 1,400 meters north-northwest of the bunker. Small, solar, bearing 341 from our position, range 2,212 meters. Crosswind. Gust is coming down the canyon. Right to left. 14 gusting 18. Vortex. Vortex has collapsed. Cycle will not peak again for 5 minutes. They did not have 5 minutes. 49 seconds to trigger. Vance's face did not move. Her mind did. In the 4 seconds she spent considering her options, she considered and rejected 7. Then she found the 8th. It was a technique she had been taught once by an instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, an old gunnery sergeant who had learned it from a Rhodesian in 1979. He had called it riding the dragon. He had forbidden anyone from using it because he had seen it miss 9 times out of 10. She had only seen it work once. "Cole, I am going to ride it." Rutherford's head snapped around. "Sergeant, spot me." "Lena, spot me." He looked at her for one long second. 5 years of his life passed behind his eyes. Then he turned his scope to the relay. "Target identified, range 2,212, hold 3.5 mils high, hold left 7 for the gust." "Negative left. I am riding the vortex clockwise. Hold right 11. He swallowed. "Holding right 11. 30 seconds. She breathed. 22. She exhaled half her air. 15. She felt at the edge of her perception the wind in the canyon. Not with her skin, with something older. She applied pressure. The rifle bucked. The second round left the muzzle and entered the arms of the dragon. Flight time 3.1 seconds. The round climbed. It drifted right. It began to curve. It caught the outer edge of the vortex and rode it, carving a shallow crescent through the air. At the peak of its arc, it was traveling almost perpendicular to its original line of flight. The vortex, as if recognizing what it carried, began to fold it back inward. The bullet came out of the curve 6 meters above the repeater antenna, descending, still drifting right. The bullet struck the antenna's base, severing the primary cable, destroying the transmitter housing, and sending the solar panel spinning into the rocks below. The signal ended. On a console in a tent outside the village of Marja, a small green light went dark. The paired sensor, having lost its relay, did not trigger. The command to initiate the IED chain did not go out. The convoy of 47 Marines 90 minutes into its run passed the kill zone at 40 miles per hour without any of its drivers ever knowing. Rutherford lowered his scope. He did not speak. Lena Vance cycled the bolt a second time. She flicked on the safety. She rested her forehead for one single second on the stock of the rifle. Her thigh ached in a way it had not ached in 14 months, a deep, bone-deep ache that ran all the way to the small piece of Afghan mortar still lodged against her femur. She did not notice. She was listening to the wind, and the wind, having done what she had asked it to do, was moving on. Beside her, Rutherford let out a breath he had been holding for 3.1 seconds and could not remember drawing. He said quietly the only word that was in him. "Ma'am." She did not look at him. She said, "Call Sentinel. Tell them the convoy is clear." The debriefing was held in a sterile conference room at 0900 the next morning. Holloway sat at the head of the table. Reeves at his right, Whitlock opposite. Vance and Rutherford stood at ease by the door. Somewhere beyond the building on the main gate, a convoy of 47 Marines was arriving at Sentinel. They were laughing. They were complaining about the coffee. They had no idea. Holloway cleared his throat. He looked at a point on the wall, not at Vance. The after-action report confirms a successful neutralization of the high-value target designated the architect. The secondary relay was also destroyed, preventing initiation of the improvised explosive device chain along the main supply route. The planned attack on Company E 2nd Battalion 3rd Marines was averted. 47 Marines are alive this morning who would not otherwise be. This was a significant victory. He paused. The words cost him something. The success of this operation was due in every meaningful respect to the intelligence and precision marksmanship of Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, supported by the outstanding work of Sergeant First Class Cole Rutherford and Captain Adeline Whitlock. Reeves stared at the table. Holloway opened a folder. "I have reviewed Staff Sergeant Vance's service record. It is extensive. Most of it is redacted. What is not redacted is the following." He began to read. "Distinguished Service, Cross Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor 3 Army Commendation Medals, with Valor Device Purple Heart for wounds sustained in Helmand Province on the 2nd of August 2010. Qualifications include Sniper School, Distinguished Honor Graduate, Marine Corps Scout, Sniper School Inner Service, Honor Graduate, Joint Signals as Intelligence Course Cyber Operations Level 4 Certification, and the Special Forces Qualification Course." He closed the file. I also made an inquiry in the last 36 hours concerning the insignia on Staff Sergeant Vance's right sleeve. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. Whitlock read it aloud. Memorandum from the Office of the Secretary of Defense dated 15 September 2010. The Phoenix emblem designation Fides Baes in Tenebris is authorized for permanent wear by operational members of Task Force Obsidian. Its wearers are exempt from local uniform regulations regarding insignia. All inquiries concerning the task force are to be directed to the undersigned. The signature was a 4-star general at the Pentagon. Holloway stood up. He walked around the table to where Vance stood at ease by the door. His steps were slow. He stopped in front of her. He reached up with hands that had been steady in 3 wars and unpinned from his own left breast the combat infantryman badge he had earned in Iraq in 1991. He held it in his palm. My comments in the dining facility 3 nights ago were in error. They were unbecoming of an officer of my rank. They will not be repeated. He paused. His eyes did something. Staff Sergeant, 5 years ago an envelope arrived at my home address. There was no return address. Inside it was a short letter. The letter informed me that the official account of my son Thaddeus's death in Ramadi in 2006 was incomplete. The letter told me with documentary citations that the captain who commanded his company that day had been issued orders by a general officer 1 echelon above her. Orders that had placed the company in the position where my son was killed. The letter named that general officer. It was signed only with a unit designator I did not recognize. He breathed in, he breathed out. Task Force Obsidian. A long silence. For 5 years, Staff Sergeant, I hated the wrong person. I do not know who wrote that letter. I do not need to know. But I have carried it in my wallet for those 5 years. And last night, while I was waiting for you to take your shot, I took it out and I read it again. And I understood something I had been unwilling to understand. He paused. Your unit does the work that the rest of us will not do, including telling fathers the truth about their sons. He raised the combat infantryman badge. He touched it gently to the phoenix patch on her sleeve. He held it there. Then he rendered her a slow, formal salute. It was a shocking gesture. A 1-star general saluting a staff sergeant. But in that room with the 4 corpses of 4 careers and the ghosts of 4 women, and the 47 Marines coming through the gate, and the memory of a boy named Thaddeus written across the general's face, the gesture felt to everyone who witnessed it like the first correct thing that had happened in that command in a long time. Colonel Trent Reeves stood up slowly. He saluted. Captain Adeline Whitlock saluted. Every officer in the room saluted. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance did not smile. She returned the salute with a crisp, perfect motion, and said only, "Sir." That evening in the SCIF, she was cleaning her rifle. The door opened. Silas Kincaid walked in. He carried in his right hand a small cloth pouch. He came and stood beside her. He watched her hands move. After a long moment, he set the pouch on the console. She stopped. She looked at it. "What is it, Command Sergeant Major?" He did not correct her on the rank. "It was mine, Beirut, 23rd October 1983. When they pulled me off the pile after 3 days, I had this in my pocket. It was my unit's patch. I have kept it in a drawer for 28 years. Last night, my boy Wyatt called me. He had heard about the convoy. He does not know the details. He knows enough." He pushed the pouch a small inch toward her. "He asked me to give this to you. He said, tell her I am still here. Tell her my boy is still here. Tell her thank you." She did not open the pouch. She laid her hand once flat on top of it. For the first time since the dining facility, for the first time since Kajaki, for the first time in a long, long time, a small, warm thing moved behind her eyes. She did not let it out, but it was there. She said quietly, "Tell your boy I said hello, Command Sergeant Major." Kincaid nodded. He walked to the door. He turned. "Staff Sergeant?" "Yes." "The broken thing still cuts. You remember that? You teach it to the next one." He walked out. She sat for a long time. Then she opened her logbook. She wrote in her small, precise hand 1 sentence. From insult to salute, correction was achieved. She closed the logbook. She turned out the light. She slept that night for the first time in 4 days. She did not dream of Kayaki. She did not dream of a dining facility, or of a general's raised finger, or of the long walk down off a ridge with a piece of iron in her leg. She dreamed instead of a small boy she had never met, throwing a baseball in a backyard in North Carolina, under the watchful eye of a grandfather with white hair and a scar across the back of one hand, a scar he had carried since a terrible October morning in 1983. In her dream, the boy caught the ball. In her dream, the old man laughed, and somewhere in a place she could not name, a voice she had not heard in a long time said very softly, "The broken thing still cuts. Teach it to the next one." She slept. And Forward Operating Base Sentinel, for the first time in 8 months, slept beneath a sky that did not carry somewhere in the dark the quiet, patient signature of a man named the Architect. The war went on. It always did. But on the morning of the 15th of November 2011, 47 Marines walked out of a dining facility in Helmand Province complaining about the coffee, and none of them knew that they had been saved, and none of them needed to. That was the whole point. That was the work. Fides in tenebris, faith in darkness.